I want to know what you love here in terms of the NBA playoff format, because this is the discussion. You've got the NBA reportedly targeting a July 31st return. And so they're hammering out, well, do we have a play-in tournament? Do we have a World Cup-style group play? We've got like pools of different teams sectioned together. Do we just go straight to the playoffs? Say it's 16 teams, we play it off from there. What would be the first part on your wish list if you had your way with the NBA postseason format?
I think because of what we're doing and how we're playing it, and I mean in Orlando, I'm calling it the Mickey Mouse Championship anyway, because it is at Disney World, and just to do a playoff with the top 16 teams, and whatever teams are there when we stop playing regular season games, right, are the teams that make the playoffs. Don't ask teams that are out of it to show up and get back in the fray. To play a couple of meaningless games that really don't matter. Just go straight to the playoffs. There have been enough games played in the regular season. I think in the 60s, right? 63, some have played a little bit more. That's fine. I can live with that as being an NBA season. If we were at 40 games, then maybe we'd have to play more because you wouldn't be able to get a true champion out of that. So I just think they should go straight to the playoffs and not worry about finishing up the regular season. What about you?
Yeah, man, I think that the more teams, the more people, the more risk that things go sideways, someone catches the virus, and then all of a sudden the playoffs are in jeopardy. And I think you got to minimize risk as much as possible. And I dislike it that there are some teams on the outside looking in that they might have scratched and clawed and won enough games and gotten to the 8th seed in the West. And okay, all right, but why are you bending over backwards just out of two reasons? For partially fairness for them, and then also the cash aspect, because you're trying to get to 70 games and appease the local TV deals. Why would you risk the playoffs for that? I mean, really, think about this, Rob. If we look back on the season and the playoffs weren't finished, and it was tied to one of these teams that's currently on the outside of the playoffs looking in, that had a couple of players who caught the virus, and then it discontinued the playoffs. Do you realize how badly that will look for the NBA and how much money is at stake when it comes to the TV money with playoff action? It's just, to me, the risk isn't worth the reward. I would say, sorry, you 14 teams that aren't currently in the playoffs. Bye. Win more games next season. It stinks, but there's a global pandemic going on. You're not invited to the party.
Right, I agree. And here we go. The NBA has to be careful. I get the Disney World, all right? Here's my reference. Don't make a mockery of the playoffs with all these, like, trick, funny things and, oh, we're going to do this. And if a guy makes a half-court shot, they make it to the playoffs. You know, if somebody throws 4 buckets of confetti in a game, then they make the playoffs. We don't want that. We don't want a circus. Do not cheapen the playoffs in any way. No play-in game. This isn't college. Don't do that.
Yeah,
I don't want that, Brian. I really, really don't.
I don't either. It makes me think of All-Star Weekend with the skills competition,
right,
where you dribble and then do the shot at the end. It's kind of like that. If you do that, coupled with your winning percentage in the season, now you might get in the playoffs. It's turning into a joke here. I think they're ultimately going to do the play-in. I think that's the way it's going to go. And I just hope that it doesn't go sideways and derail the season. I just don't think the risk is worth the reward. But I'll say this, Rob. The one thing I really don't want is the World Cup soccer-style group play format, because I dislike teams that haven't earned their way into the playoffs just being included. And you've got a shot to get hot at the right time if you're playing 2 games against the other 4 teams in your pool. If you are one of the 2 teams with the best record, you're moving on. You shouldn't even be in the playoffs, and you can move on to the next stage. I don't like that at all.
Right. And that's what I'm talking about with cheapening it. You just don't. We got to be real careful. And I know the NBA, they think that they got a mulligan, so we could just do anything now because of the pandemic. You know, Like, we could just use it, and we'll use this as an excuse. Let's start the season on Christmas next year. Let's do this. Let's do that. Be careful. Don't mess with the product just because we're not living a normal life.
I'm Brian Noe. He is Rob Parker. We're coming to you live from the Geico Fox Sports Radio studios. 15 minutes could save you 15% or more on car insurance. Visit geico.com for a free rate quote. Okay, how about this? This idea has been talked about quite a bit. If it's just the 16 playoff teams, or even if you do have a play-in tournament, whatever, you get down to the 16 somehow, some way. Do you want it to be traditional? Just Eastern Conference, Western Conference, best of 7? Or would you like to see them seeded 1 through 16 regardless of conference?
When we started the season, that wasn't the plan. So why change it now? It makes no sense. Everybody's there, right? Everybody's going to be in Orlando. So before it was about people were talking about doing that because of some teams and their records or whatever. All I'm saying is when we entered this season, that was not on the table. So why are we adjusting to that? There's no reason to do that. Keep it the way it is. In the next CBA or the next thing that you want to do and you want to change that, do it then. But that's not what people signed up for this year. Why are we doing it? How does that change anything? How does that affect TV money, revenue? What does that do? I don't get it.
I wouldn't want to see it be the format going forward, and I don't think it ever would be. There's just too much travel. I mean, goodness, you could have.
It, right.
When the pandemic is a thing of the past, and eventually it will be at some point. Can you imagine the Heat and the Lakers having a first-round series, and then the Lakers advance, and they're playing the 76ers or whatever? Like, there's just too much travel. I don't like that format going forward. I got to tell you, though, Rob, I like it for this year alone, because here's how I think of it. The NBA, and rightfully so, understandably so, they have to take things away. It's like, all right, we're taking the regular season away due to a pandemic. Hey, we're taking away regular season games. I think they got to give us something. And if they say, hey, we're going to do something a little bit different this year, we're going to have teams seeded 1 through 16 regardless of conference, think about the fruit it might bear. If you've got the Clippers and Lakers in the finals, I think it serves as a healthy distraction of this season being so much different in a bad way than other championship seasons. And I think it distracts you from this whole, hey, is there an asterisk here with the team that eventually wins the championship? I think it would help get people out of that mindset a little bit, do something different. It could be good for your league. I actually like 1 through 16 just for this specific season.
Yeah, I don't want to say I'm an old man, hey, you kids, get off my lawn kind of guy. But I am when it comes to this. I just think doing too much is just not necessary. Actually, during this time, it should be doing less. Just play the games the way we expect them. People are going to watch. You have a captive audience. Nobody's going to turn the channel because you're not doing some newfangled thing that the millennials want. You don't have to worry about that. You saw the ratings for Michael Jordan's documentary, right?
Through the roof.
Everything that's on except for Lance Armstrong's documentary is doing well. All right, everything.
Yeah, we couldn't have yelled. We don't care about cycling any louder than
that thing bombed.
That did not work out too well.
But you got my point. Is that you have a captive audience. You don't have. All we need is games.
Yeah.
We don't need whipped cream, and we don't need newfangled clowns coming out of a mini car. We don't need any of that. Just give us some good basketball, some good matchups, what we're used to seeing, and we will be there, and we'll watch.
I know it, man. It's true. You're right. We're starving right now. If you're starving for a meal and someone throws you, some ramen noodles, which I love, by the way, it's going to feel like a 5-star restaurant, right? It's going to seem like a 7-course meal. That's what we're at for sports. So, yeah, you don't have to have some crazy new format. We're going to eat it up. Even if it's bad basketball, Brian, at least it's sports back on the TV, you know?
I agree. But it feels like they're trying to put whipped cream on my fried chicken. I don't need whipped cream. The fried chicken tastes good just the way it is.
Okay, I'm going to get you out of your comfort zone because Woj tweeted this out where you've got Adam Silver. His final recommendation is expected to be 20 to 22 teams invited to resume the season. So if there is some sort of play-in tournament, or let's just keep it simple. Let's say there are 20 to 22 teams. That's what they decide. What do you want them to do from there in terms of a play-in or a postseason format?
That's a good question. I just don't know. I mean, I don't know. I don't have the standings in front of me. Are there teams that are, instead of 16, or there teams that are half a game out or one game out and they feel like it's not fair to those teams, or they, you know what I mean? That's what it would have to be. But to me, those teams, I still would just take the top 8 teams from each conference, and it would just have to be tough luck to the teams that are a few games out or whatever. That's what it sounds like to me, is that they're trying to pacify the couple of teams that might only be a game or two out and thought, maybe we could make the playoffs. Like the Portland Trailblazers, who were in the Western Conference Finals a year ago, right?
Yeah.
That right now, Brian, they're on the outside looking in, correct?
Yeah, they are. I agree with you, Rob. I would do just the top 16 teams. But if they say, you know what, we're going to do 20 teams, what I would do, and this option has been discussed, I would take the 4 bubble teams in the Western Conference because they have better records than the 9 and 10th place teams in the East. So I would take those teams, the Blazers, the Pelicans, right? Because they want Zion in there.
Slip. Yep.
Yeah, sorry. The Kings and the Spurs. I would take those 4 teams.
Want Zion in. You know that.
They absolutely do. I would take those 4 Western Conference bubble teams if they insist on 20 teams, right? I would have them duke it out. Whoever emerges from those 4 teams, then they would play the Grizzlies. Best of 3 series, that's your 8 seed. If they insist on 20 teams, the Grizzlies have to get some sort of advantage for being the current 8 seed. They shouldn't have to jump through all the hoops that the teams below them have to jump through. That's not fair to them.
No, they're there. They've played well enough to be in the top 8 when the season stopped, right?
Yeah.
I just don't understand why that would be fair.
All right, coming up next from the Geico Studios, we want to hear from you. Are you on board with the NBA's play-in tournament plan? If it's up to you, what do you want the postseason format to be? Hit us up.
Eric in Oregon, you're on The Odd Couple, Fox Sports Radio. What you got?
Hey, good evening, fellas. Nice to hear you.
You too, bud. Thank you.
Yeah. So, all right, as much as a Portland Trailblazer fan, as much as I'd love a tournament because it would give Dame a chance to get in there, I mean, I think we're just getting crazy complicated. We need to keep this simple. We don't need to overcomplicate things. This is already a product that everybody wants to see. It's already going to do well. I am kind of in favor of reseeding, but it's still not going to do anything to make the first round any more watchable. The Lakers are still going to roll through Brooklyn, or Milwaukee's going to roll through. So, like I said, I feel bad for Dame, and I feel bad, for guys that were on the edge. But at the same time, it's like, well, teams should have played better in the regular season.
That's right. There you go. There's a Blazer fan who's just being honest.
Yeah.
They didn't play well enough for, I don't know how many games did they play, Brian, 64 or whatever the number was. They didn't play well enough.
Yeah, they're 29 and 37. I know they've had a lot of injuries, but goodness, being 8 games under 500, you shouldn't have a bleeding heart for the Blazers or a team that's right around there. And with those 4 bubble teams, they're right around that same area. So, yeah.
One of the all-time, Peter Vesey, who was a basketball columnist for the New York Post. I think he nicknamed them during the bad days, the Jailblazers, but that's another story.
Yeah, it is. Yeah. I do think, though, real quick, Rob, I think that look, if you think about the 1 through 16 thing, it wouldn't be for the first round. It would be the payoff would come later in the playoffs to do something different where you might get a couple of Eastern Conference teams matched up in the conference, what would be the conference finals, the third round, I guess, or maybe you get Lakers Clippers for the championship. The payoff would be later. It wouldn't be for the first round.
Yeah. All right. Calvin in San Antonio, you're on The Odd Couple, Fox Sports Radio. What's up, Calvin?
Good evening, guys. How y'all doing?
Doing good.
Great.
Good. Okay, this is what I have to say. Although, like you guys said, I don't think changing it would create any more buzz about being able to watch sports again. But I do like the idea of the 1 through 16 even past this season for one reason only. I can't stand, and it makes my skin crawl when teams with losing records make it in the playoffs. If 1 through 16 would eliminate teams with losing records making it in the playoffs, then I'm for it. It's the same for
here's
football.
the problem.
I hate it.
Here's the problem. When you start to get rid of conferences and it's the travel part that Brian talked about, and then also imagine if you had an NBA playoffs where teams from the East Coast weren't involved, and it was basically, I'm just saying, you had a Western heavy playoffs where 12 of the 16 teams came from the West. That's what you also don't want to be a part of.
Yeah. And I love the tradition of it too, Rob, where, goodness, you think about The Last Dance, where it starts off even before the 90s Bulls, where the Pistons, they couldn't get past the Celtics. And then the Bulls, they can't get past the Pistons. And the storylines that come from that, if you have 1 through 16 every year, you just don't have as good of a chance to have that same storyline play out. And I think that's unfortunate.
Definitely. Joseph in Virginia, you're on the Odd Couple Fox Sports Radio. What's up, Joseph?
Good evening, fellas. Rob, I see why you be angry all the time, man. You the workhorse of the team.
Man, hey, I'm always here. Me and Alex and Steve DeSager. Rob
Yes,
G,
sir. Yes, sir.
Rob G and Chris Broussard, man, they got the life.
Hey, I appreciate you fellas big time. But I got to say, I would have to go with the 22 teams. I feel like if you put those 22 in, I mean, that extends it out. At least in the Western Conference, you get teams like Sacramento, New Orleans, and Portland. Those are the young, exciting teams as far as with Sacramento and New Orleans. Those guys were kind of getting it together at the end. I think there will be a lot more, I guess you could say, narratives that would come out of it if you expanded it out. I know it's reaching for Zion, but we're in a pandemic, and the NBA is a hot topic right now. So I'm for the fences. Why not?
This shouldn't be about one player and trying to squeeze him in. They should. I'm serious. That's the one part that I don't like. I think
John Morant's going to be a tough out, though.
But you know this is about the Pelicans. You know it is. And Zion, Brian, am I right?
Well, that's a big part of it. There's no doubt. And what the plan is that they hit us with, whatever it is, will tell us what they're truly thinking. If it's all these teams that are invited there, if they're playing about 8 games, well, then it's the TV contracts, right? They're trying to appease that. If it's, hey, we need 4 bubble teams in the West, that's going to be Zion, right? So their plans will tell us what they're thinking.
No, I agree with you, but I'm always like suspicious because I think the NBA has a little WWE in it, and they love that stuff. All right, Brian in California, you're on the Odd Couple Fox Sports Radio. What's up, Brian? Okay, what about Marty in Kentucky? Marty, you're on the Odd Couple Fox Sports Radio.
What's up, Rob? How y'all doing tonight?
Great.
I'm good. I got to say, I'm all for any changes they can make this year. I don't want them to change it for good. I would want to go back to traditional. But for this year, if you can squeeze Zion in, if you can fix it where the best 2 teams get in the finals, even possibly a LA versus LA in the finals, which if you made the deal right with Disney, you could bring it back to the Staples Center when it got down to those 2 teams, if that happened. I mean, a lot of interesting things could happen. And the NBA is a business, and they're hurting like every other business is. They've lost a ton of revenue, and any ideas they can come up with to mix this up and make a little more money and get more viewers, I'm all for it this year.
Hey, Marty, what if they do it, right, and they do the shuffle the deck, right, after for the playoffs, 1 to 16, and LeBron gets knocked out in the earlier rounds by a good team. Then they'll be crying bloody murder like that wasn't fair. That will be the cry. Oh, that wasn't fair. They made LeBron play in the first round. That was Philadelphia. They weren't supposed to play him until right. I'm just saying that would be the argument.
Well, LeBron fans are going to cry no matter what round he goes out.
No, I agree. but Brian, if he gets knocked out in the first or second round by an Eastern team, will that not be the argument?
you'll just be like, we need to do 1 through 16 from this point on. If he got knocked out by an Eastern Conference team, that's the one way to get you on board with 1 through 16, Rob.
I would love it then. I'm all in. Count me in.
Yeah.
Thanks, Marty.
Yes, thank you. Coming up next from the Geico Studios, we toss it over to Sean Powell. Sean, we're trying to figure out what the NBA's postseason is going to be like. When you go on shows like this one and we're like, what's it going to be, Sean? Do you just want to be like, I don't know. I'm not sure.
Yeah, well, one thing I do know is that Rob Parker probably has underwear 117 years old. That guy's as far as the NBA, I mean, look, anyone who says they know what's going to happen, they're guessing. I mean, look, you're talking about a lot of moving parts. You're talking about medical. You're talking about the laws in each state or municipality. You're talking about a lot of teams, players, personnel, media. Well, I'm not so sure the media is going to be allowed in. That's another story. But that's a lot of moving parts, and it's got to happen, I would say, somewhat quickly. I'm not even so sure the NBA has finalized anything. But they're in the process of doing so, and we'll all have to sit back and wait to see how, number one, what kind of plan they're going to come up with. Number two, is science going to participate? And then number three, how they're going to carry it out.
Sean, are we being a little, what's the right word, to question the NBA and its integrity when they start talking about, well, instead of picking the 16 teams that would normally be in the playoffs, we're looking at 20 to 22. Are they trying to get Zion and the Pelicans in the playoffs?
That's a great question. I know on one end you have LeBron James, so they don't have to worry about him. He's in the playoffs. On the other hand, how can you make it interesting just in terms of adding some pizzazz to this? Because it's going to be a very unique and unprecedented situation for the NBA. Also, some of those teams probably had a fighting chance to maybe steal the eighth and final playoff spot in the West. Certainly not the East, but in the West, where they were separated by 3.5 games, and then you had a team like New Orleans that was on the rise with Zion. You also had a team chasing in the Spurs, who had they've gone to the playoffs since Rob last changed his underwear. That's a long time.
It has been a long. I think since Moby Dick was a guppy is more like it.
Yeah. So I mean, there was a moderate fight for the eighth spot. Also, you had Portland, which was starting to get a little bit healthier, maybe making a run at that eighth spot. So I think the NBA might try to have like a little mini tournament for that eighth spot. But if they do that again, you're talking about inviting 2 or 3 more teams to the mix. So now you're having 20 teams there. Is that the most prudent and wise thing to do, given that you're going to have to do constant testing and, having people under wraps and everything? So I think that's what they're trying to hash out right now.
Sean, reportedly over half the GMs voted on just going straight to the playoffs with the current 16 teams there. So it gets my mind thinking, are there more coaches, players that feel the same way as Damian Lillard, where they don't want to restart and play meaningless games if they're on the outside of the playoffs looking in?
I don't think the NBA was ever going to finish out the regular season. I think, look, Adam Silver says everything was on the table, but I think that's one of the things that's off the table. I don't think the league was ever in position to have all 30 teams play out the schedule. And I know there are local TV contracts that have to be satisfied and everything, but that is such an undertaking. So I don't think Damon has anything to worry about. I think he's going to be sitting at home and watching it just like the rest of us. And by the way, Damian Lillard is a stand-up great guy. And I think people probably took what he said out of context. He's talking about, well, look, I mean, if the Blazers were out of the playoffs in a normal regular season, of course he'd play out the stretch. But in this situation, asking him and their team to fly all the way to, say, Orlando to play meaningless games when the season is essentially over, then that probably doesn't make too much sense. So I just wanted to have some clarification.
It still came out bad, Sean, just the idea that people are out of work, and it just sounded like a guy saying, I'm not playing in no game. It came off the wrong way.
Rob, and I don't disagree with you, Rob. I think, but context is everything. And you also have to know Damian Lillard. Nobody plays harder. Nobody shows up more nights. This guy doesn't take nights off, doesn't take performances off, doesn't take possessions off. He loves basketball, okay? Maybe it didn't come out the right way to people who don't know him, but if you know Damian Lillard, you know that he earns his keep. And people in Portland, he's beloved there.
Sean, how important does the NBA have to be careful not to tinker too much to the playoffs, not to tinker too much with changes so much stuff that you don't devalue the championship and it doesn't turn into a Mickey Mouse championship in Orlando because you got bells and whistles and you're jumping through hoops to change the playoffs?
Well, Rob, that's a great question. Look, I mean, history is going to say what history is going to say. And we all have our opinions about, what's a legitimate championship. I go back to the 1980s when, the Celtics and Lakers were playing each other every year. To me, that championship weighs more than, say, the Lakers beating up on the New Jersey Nets back in the Kobe Shaq years, only because when you had the Lakers and the Celtics playing each other, those were great, great, epic teams. But the bottom line is history will probably just reflect a championship is a championship is a championship, I mean, are we going to go back and nitpick all of Bill Russell's championships and say, the guy only really had 6, because...
but there were only 10 teams back then.
That's what I'm saying. So, look, we all have our opinions on that. But aside from that, I don't think there's really nothing the NBA can do. They're just trying their best to finish the season and to, just to have some sort of, just have an ending. Now, the ending's not going to satisfy everybody, but here's the other thing. I think a big push just to have this to reach a conclusion has to do with LeBron James. Here's a guy who's healthy, who's an MVP candidate, and he is going to be a ratings magnet for, the TV networks who've lost millions of dollars, if not billions, millions of dollars so far. I think if this was last year and LeBron was hurt and unable to play, would we see this big, massive push to finish the season? Well,
I think that's fair.
I think they try to finish the season, but it just seems like right now there's just a much more meaningful push because you have the game's biggest box office draw. He's healthy, and his team is in position to win a championship. That's the elephant in the room that nobody's talking about. They don't really want to put that out there, but it's plain and clear. LeBron is healthy. His team has a chance to win the championship, and he is the antidote for a situation like this, where the league and the networks need a savior. He's the savior.
Sean Powell, NBA.com writer. You can follow him at Powell to the People, which is easily the best handle in the game right now. Come on.
That's not bad. Is that better than Getting Robbed? No, Getting Robbed?
I thought yours was at Tidy Whitey's. Is that not right, Rob?
That doesn't work either. No.
Sean, thank you for your time, bud. Have a good night. We'll catch up with you soon.
Thanks, guys. Anytime, guys.